This is Deeper Things with your host, author Adam Bray. I'm Adam Bray. Thanks for watching. So I'm starting this new podcast. It's my aspiration to do this regularly, maybe once a week. I'm doing it outside today because I haven't had a chance to set up my studio for this, and it's kind of the last of the nice fall days before winter comes. So I thought I'd try recording outside here. It might sound a bit like a waterfall. It's a windy day, so it just seems like there's no perfect time or place to do this. So hopefully you can still hear all right. But let's begin. This first episode, I wanted to talk about race, gender, and sexuality in Star Wars and the Rings of Power and pop culture. These are issues that are kind of, they are consuming our culture for the last few years. They've been made out to be, the most important thing, the thing that defines a person above all other characteristics. And I beg to differ with that outlook, but that's the way it's being treated by our entertainment industry, as well as other spheres in society. I believe, people are more than that. But so, let's talk about that. And I want to talk about some of the new shows that are out. And some of the other forms of entertainment. But first, let's dig into Andor, the new Star Wars show that is on Disney Plus, and that premiered, I guess, a couple of weeks ago. I think we just saw, episode 5 this week. That's episode where we have dinner with the Mothma family for like the second or third time, and we watch Cyril eat cereal with his mom, and we watch Cassian kind of go on a walkabout, I'll just say, when I first saw the trailer for this series, my first thought was, it looks great, it looks exciting, but if you didn't tell me it was Star Wars, I'd have no idea. It doesn't look anything like Star Wars, and that's, for the most part, that's been my reaction to the show. 5 episodes in, with each episode we are getting more and more Star Wars references, and I think that's by design. But those first three episodes, so there's virtually nothing in there that's recognizable. Nothing in the aesthetic, nothing in the symbols. There's no stormtroopers or TIE fighters or things like that. You have to look really hard to recognize any aliens or droids. Mostly in the background, and the few that there are, they all come from, interestingly, from the Disney era. So like the sequel trilogies and Solo. There is a Y-wing you see part of it at one point, but I don't think that's even. It's not from the classic trilogy. It's something that's been reused from a Disney movie. So there's nothing recognizable. In fairness, I think Tony Gilroy, the creator of the show, there is a bit of a method to his madness. I think he just wanted to start carve out his own unique corner of the universe where Cassian is living and growing up, and then as Cassian moves into the conflict and we're pulled into the story, it would become increasingly familiar in recognizable items, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad approach. It's just a little jarring and unsettling starting out, but there are other things that are missing. Well, really, all the Star Wars fundamentals are missing. There's, Star Wars is a space opera. It's big bombastic themes and stories driven by, epic music by John Williams. There's none of that in here. There's no fantasy. There's no force. There's nothing of the mystical Star Wars stuff. There's no Skywalkers. There's virtually no droids or aliens. Very rarely, except for that first droid. No romance, no fantasy, no mythology, no fun to this. It's just not. It doesn't feel like the George Lucas Star Wars, and I think it kind of goes back to a quote that Tony Gilroy said that I think a lot of people have forgotten. It was about 4 years ago. I'll just read it. He was talking about Rogue One. He says, "I've never been interested in Star Wars ever, so I had no reverence for it whatsoever. I was unafraid about that." And then recently he's been asked, I think just a few months ago, if he was a fan of Star Wars. And he said no, and didn't elaborate. Now, I don't bring this up, as a harsh criticism of him. I think he's a fantastic filmmaker. Rogue One is my favorite Star Wars movie. I'm sure he's a fine person and all that. This isn't an attack on his character. But he has made these statements, and I think it shows. I think that, the whole tone and aesthetic, the fundamentals of what makes, Lucasian Star Wars, something you'd see in George Lucas's movies, or the projects of Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau, that's entirely absent of this. And so for me, it's the show is kind of a mixed bag. I'd say, Book of Boba Fett and Kenobi for me, Last Jedi, they missed the mark for things that are over here on the spectrum, but Andor is missing the mark, over here on the other end of the spectrum. It's like it's overcorrected for the mistakes of those other things. So it's, we'll wait and see where it goes. I think and in fairness, I think it will get better as it goes. I think it'll start to look a lot more like Star Wars. I'm not sure it will ever, though. I don't think it will ever, look like other things in Star Wars. But there's still a lot left. I think we've got, 3, 6, 7 more episodes, 2 more, the finale to this, and 2 more story arcs. So we will see. I think there's some other problems I have with it, though. This is Star Wars' first on-screen swear, the S word. I don't think that's a great badge of honor. It's just, Star Wars has always been family friendly. It's always been for kids. That's another fundamental, and if those are our badges of honor to, you know, see if we can push the envelope a little with each thing, I think we're putting our values maybe in the wrong place for Star Wars. I think it's also problematic. Tony Gilroy and at least one of the actresses, maybe others, in interviews they keep mentioning how, you know, it was that that Andor is sort of an intentional commentary on, you know, current American politics and the political environment. I just don't think that's the right thing to lead with in the PR for a Star Wars show. You know, our society is so divisive politically, and to keep dragging this into the entertainment, you know, people want to see Star Wars as an escape, you know, something that we can all, you know, George Lucas created something we can all relate to from different sides of the spectrum. It was about bigger, timeless, you know, more themes of good and evil. Yes, it was inspired by, you know, like World War II and, you know, a little bit of Vietnam and Return of the Jedi with the Ewoks and stuff like that. But where Star Wars excelled under George Lucas was the bigger themes, you know, these grander ideas, and, you know, both, you know, and it's in those themes, you know, and the politics in that sense, you know, from grander things, you know, also, you know, the aesthetics and the serials, you know, and the stories and stuff. George was interested in more in bygone eras. He wasn't caught up in the present here and now of culture or politics. And, you know, that's not to say he never did, but, you know, in small ways. But that's also not to say that George Lucas or Star Wars was perfect. Neither would be true. So I just think dragging Star Wars into politics is not a good idea, and I wish there was, you know, the people making this show, you know, we also can't hold them up to be perfect either. You know, people are going to make mistakes. I make mistakes. I certainly make mistakes when I've done PR for Star Wars or Marvel or anything else. But I wish going forward we would avoid that. But unfortunately, I think some of that is baked into Andor itself. You know, this episode this week made reference to refugee kids being in cages when Andor and the other rebel there were talking about growing up and the youth centers that they had been sent to live in. You know, and that's taken from recent stuff. So yeah, I think unfortunately it might be baked in there, but we'll see. But I wanted to get into the diversity aspect, the race, gender, and sexuality thing. Much has been made about the diversity and inclusion in the show. Now, I'll say, starting out, I think diversity and inclusion is a good thing. You know, you want everybody to be involved, to feel like they're welcome. You know, it's a good business decision. It's also, you know, nice to be welcoming and hospitable. So I don't have any problems with that in the broad sense. It all comes down to how you go about doing this that can be the issue. And so, you know, much has been made of Diego Luna's Mexican accent. Now, you know, I don't know about you all, but I I think, his representation there is great, as just an ordinary looking white guy who's not particularly handsome or athletic. I kind of feel like Cassian or Diego Luna represents me. You'll have to forgive the wind here. It might be a little noisy. Hopefully you can still hear me all right. Yeah, so I think he represents me in that regard. And they've gone to his Mexican accent because he actually is white European, probably more so even than I am, because like I think I've read, most of white Americans actually have Native American ancestry, as I do, and so his late mother is I guess she's British, father Mexican, looks like maybe from Spanish descent, I don't know, but so they've really, in the marketing, they've made a big point of his Mexican accent rather than touting his ethnicity, which is just as white as I am. So I've got to ask, where do you go with that? At what point with this whole diversity have you included everybody? I mean, if you're going to talk about accents, not even languages, accents, or languages, I speak Vietnamese, I speak Cham, does that qualify? Am I diverse, in that respect? Where are you going to draw that line? And what other categories matter? What about, do we need to include people with big noses? Does Adam Driver cover that? What about, fat people? Do we need to tout that we've included fat people with the two red-haired Scottish guys in this show that kind of look like Austin Powers' fat bastard? People with drug habits, struggling, with Carrie Fisher, do we need to tout that sort of inclusion? Is that a basis? People with glasses, do we need to have that? We've got Dr. Pershing, do we need to put him out for that? I'm just wondering at what point, how far do we have to go with this hierarchy of intersectional oppression in terms of our inclusion? At what point is everybody included? So maybe that's a question for you all. But yeah, oh, and notably, this episode of Andor has it's Star Wars' second on-screen lesbian couple. The first was in the end of The Rise of Skywalker, the infamous lesbian kiss at the end of the movie. In this episode of Andor, it completely went over my head. That the person that the rebel leader is sharing her blanket with is the other rebel chick. And that's why they asked the other gal if she had been told the secret by the female leader, is because, well, they're sleeping together. So yeah, it's definitely one of the major themes of Andor. And I'm not saying by any means, don't include these people, don't include these people from these categories. I mean, these people are already in Star Wars, and the more the merrier. What I'm saying is, how far do we have to keep categorizing people, keep chopping everyone up into groups of this intersectional oppression, and parading them around and presenting them not as people, not as valued for their acting ability, and who they are, but valuing them based solely on what color their skin is, or whether they're a man or a woman, who they're sleeping with, or valuing them based on their accent. Tell me about their acting ability, their acting credentials. But like Diego Luna, he's been on this whole publicity stint, and how many times have I heard about his Mexican accent? It's great. He's got a great accent. All that's good. I'm glad he's in Star Wars. I'm certainly put lots of Mexicans in Star Wars. I'm perfectly happy with that. But how far are we going to keep categorizing people, chopping them up into groups, and presenting them solely in these hierarchies of oppression? I don't think it's a great way to go, and I don't think there's ever going to be any end to it. So yeah, let's move on. So there you go. Overall, the show's been kind of hit or miss. I will keep watching it. Well, I wouldn't say hit or miss. I think it's not my favorite. I would have, at episode 2, I would have turned the show off and not continued if I had not known that this was Star Wars. It just felt to me like, not that it was bad, just that it felt like one of the many other sci-fi shows that are out there. There wasn't anything in it to hook me. Now there are good things, there are great things about it. The filming is great, the production quality is great. It looks beautiful. The sets look amazing, the props, the ships. The filming location is great. All that stuff in Scotland, those great landscapes. The acting is great. Skarsgård, for the guy from the new Dune movie, and from the crazy professor from Thor, he's great. I enjoyed his alter ego there. And Genevieve O'Reilly's probably my favorite of the show. Hot Mothma. Reminds me a bit of J.K. Rowling. She's actually, I think she's my favorite part. She's a superb actress. So, it looks good, it sounds good, even though it's really only this episode where we start hearing familiar sound effects from Star Wars. The music's definitely not familiar. So there's some good things. I thought episode 3 was good, just in that it was action and exciting, and it kind of wrapped up that arc. I think these episodes are getting better as we move further in, but it's not The Mandalorian, which is kind of where I think the bar has been set. It's not Clone Wars. It's not Rogue One. So there you have it. But I wanted to talk about a game that is celebrating its second anniversary, I guess this past week, and that is Star Wars Squadrons. It is a flight simulator game, kind of after the tradition of the X-Wing and TIE Fighter games from the 1990s, but taking place, well, let's see, I'm trying to remember. I've got the game and I played it, but I only played it for a few days and then I stuffed it in the drawer, so I guess that says how much I enjoyed it. I'm trying to remember what era it takes place in. It has Hera Syndulla, so it's either late in the rebellion or right after Return of the Jedi. I can't recall. And this came out well, 2 years ago. But well, this game, you know, it is a flight simulator, but it does play like it was more designed to bring issues of, you know, gender and sexuality to the forefront in Star Wars, and using a flight simulator as the vehicle for that. Now, these issues, I don't recall them coming up in marketing for the game before it came out. But as soon as the game came out and people got to play it and see it, then that became the number one issue. And that one of the characters, Ko Van Z, was non-binary and had they/them pronouns. I think the first character in Star Wars to do that. She's non-binary, but there's definitely a strong air of trans in her character, though technically I'm not sure that's what she is. But I know people in the LGBT that identify in the LGBT community have often, you'll see online that they refer to her as trans. But there's Ko Van Z, and there is Varko. Ko is a rebel pilot. Varko Gray is a Imperial TIE fighter pilot, and he is gay, and I believe he has I believe it's a husband that is mentioned in the storyline. But yeah, so it's forefront in this game, and an issue that a lot of people may not realize. Gina Carano, who got famously fired from The Mandalorian. What caused the stir was when people online were harassing her, almost stalking her, to try to pressure her into putting pronouns into her bio. She didn't go along. She resisted it, and she put beep bop boop, which it's not confirmed, but I think it's actually a quote from a song at the Disney Star Wars park. I think there's a song called Beep Bop Boop. But she put that in her pronouns, caused a big uproar, because people said that she was making fun of, you know, people with pronouns, or custom pronouns, which she has said is not at all that. She was just making, you know, a statement that, you know, if you're going to force me to do it, I'm going to, you know, put what I want. You know, I'm not going to conform to what you say I have to do. But yeah, so got a lot of people mad, and she's detailed all this in her interviews. Ben Shapiro with the Daily Wire, she goes all into that. So you can refer to that. I believe it's still on YouTube. But I bring that up because this game was soon to be released at that point. So it ties, Gina's situation ties directly to this game. I don't think most people realize that there was a connection. So yeah, the game overall, I found well, it was the in-mission graphics I found to be disappointing. It wasn't as good as what I thought it would be. The between mission activities, when you're on the flagship and you're talking to the people on your team, I found it to be a bit cumbersome and tedious and kind of boring. I found the game itself to be buggy. Several times in missions I got stuck and had to hit the reset button. And it just didn't draw me in. I loved Last Jedi Fallen Order. I think that's one of the best games to come out of Star Wars in a long time. I really liked the first Battlefront game, and I'm playing on a PlayStation 4. Really liked that first Battlefront. Played the crap out of it. Battlefront 2 just did not get me. There were disappointments in the story, and it felt kind of monotonous in the battle games. Maybe the gimmick of that format just wore off after already playing a game of it in the first iteration. But this one just did not grab me. Star Wars Squadrons did not grab me like the previous games. I am looking forward to Jedi Survivor. But the game itself, it was very forgettable. It seemed like a couple of months after it came out, nobody was really talking about it anymore, except for these gender and sexuality issues. And apart from Kao and Darko, I guess, well, you've got one thing that's sets this apart is it seems like female pilots are the majority. Fine, whatever. And I don't know if it was intentional or not, but it does seem like other characters are on the LGBTQ spectrum. I don't know if that's explicitly stated, but you do get that vibe. So I'm saying this to, so you understand how much these issues play into the theme of the game. But I guess what's particularly was off-putting is that you start the game, you're crafting your pilot, and you start the game basically as a trans character. At least that's how my game was set up when I started playing. With, I believe it was a male, and there's you can play as either side. I think I'm recalling playing as the Imperial, who started out with a male face and maybe a female body and female voice. But I'm not sure of the exact combination, but whatever it was a mix. And that's how you start, is the default. And I found that off-putting. And my question is the appropriateness of all of this in a kid's game. With Darko Gray, I look at this on a wider viewpoint. Romance in general in the game with the pilots. especially with Imperials. It had, I'm 47 years old. It had never occurred to me until the Disney era, when these issues were raised, who Tarkin was sleeping with. We find that out in a Disney novel. It was, I think it was a Certain Point of View book. We find out that he had a relationship with another male officer. It had never occurred to me who anybody was sleeping with. Certainly on the Imperial side, any of these pilots, that they were romantic lives, they're married and all of that. And I just, whether they're gay or heterosexual, I'm just not sure I don't think it's the right focus of a game, especially a game at kids. I know as as an adult, I would rather the game was focusing on shooting down other fighters and other pilots, that I want the focus on the action. So I question, was it ever considered whether this was even an appropriate venue to discuss, to go into the romance and the sex lives of these pilots? Is that the right use of the game? Is that the productive use of storytelling? I don't think it is. And then when it comes to the issue of creating trans characters, and all this stuff, I would also ask, was it ever considered whether this is even appropriate? Because what it does is it deceives kids into thinking, with a flick of a button, with a flick of a switch, I can change my gender and I can be any gender I want. And that is not true. Not true at all. To go through a transition surgery, it's not a one-time thing. It's not a two-time thing. It's probably not a three-time thing. It can be a lifelong issue of surgeries. You've got your top surgery, you've got the bottom surgery, all sorts of plastic surgeries on the hips and on the face, and other areas of the body, to create a male penis. You've got to flay the skin off the arm or the thigh of the person, and they will have lifelong grotesque scars. Many people, they can't wear a bathing suit, or choose not to, or a tank top, because of just the gruesome, brutal scarring that it leaves on them. To create these fake genitals, whether penis or vagina, the body doesn't recognize that as a legitimate part of the body. It recognizes it as a wound that can become infected, or atrophy, die and fall off, or try to close up. It's a lifelong issue of seeing doctors to address these problems, these complications. There's hormonal issues. There's cancer risks. There's so many, ongoing health issues for the rest of your lives, not to mention psychological issues, and depression and anxiety and things that do not go away with a transition surgery. For some, it gets even worse. And so to present the mixing and matching of gender in this game, it's not appropriate. It's not an appropriate thing to mislead kids about. And I'll say again, making your fans feel included and welcome is just standard business sense. So I think it's a very legitimate question. How can I make anyone in the LGBTQ spectrum that's identifying that way? How can we make them feel welcome? So that's a good question to ask. It's just a matter of how you're going to do that. And I don't think this was the right way to go about it. So, for many reasons, all of this, as well as the gameplay itself, the game was a miss for me. But it is the second anniversary for Star Wars Squadrons, and Kale as a groundbreaking, being the first person in Star Wars, I think, with the they/them pronouns. It's an important game to be aware of if you're interested in Star Wars. And lastly, I wanted to talk about the Rings of Power on Amazon Prime. That's the Tolkien series that they've been talking about for several years now, and is a big deal. I guess my quick reaction to the show is a bit of disappointment. I think the show looks amazing. The designs, the costuming, the locations, the effects, it all looks great. I think it sounds amazing. Sound effects, music, and all that. It's got Bear McCreary, who is famous for Battlestar Galactica, the scores, and Outlander. And a lot of different things. One of my favorite composers. It sounds great, and I have friends at Weta in New Zealand that have been working on the show, whether consultants or I think some in the art and the design. And I've met people who are, background actors. I've probably been to some of the filming locations even. So looks and sounds great, though I think it needs more New Zealand scenery. So much of it is what we're seeing is, artificial CGI stuff. It would be great if there was more New Zealand shots, and I've heard people in New Zealand complaining about that as well, especially people that are actually have some ties to Peter Jackson's productions. So yeah, that is good, but it's been very boring. Not much happens, and similar complaint with Andor, actually, the Star Wars show. Both very boring. Not much is happening. Neither show. Well, Andor doesn't work at all cut up into those individual episodes as they are. They should have just dumped it all at once. Rings of Power works a little bit better, but it's just nothing happens in most episodes. The only one of significance was really the one with the big battle with the volcano at the end, which I found actually rather convoluted. Reminds me of actually the scene at the end of the second Hobbit movie where they're being chased by Smaug all around in his horde, and then they try to drown him in gold and it doesn't work and he escapes. And That was actually the weakest part of that whole trilogy. And I think that was kind of the weak ending of this show, creating Mount Doom. Yeah, so it's kind of boring. I'm not drawn to any particular character, which is very different than the Lord of the Rings, where like we were drawn to all of pretty much everybody in the Fellowship. Maybe not Boromir, but everybody was so charismatic and sympathetic, and you could relate to, especially the hobbits. Gosh, we loved those guys, but there's nobody in this show that I am drawn to, and I think it's like that way for most viewers. And the main character, Galadriel, is completely unlikable and a total bully, apart from this final episode where she seems to soften up a little bit here. So yeah, it's not been a great show, other than just the look and sound of it. But it's actually surprisingly fallen into kind of the same trap that the sequel trilogy, Star Wars sequel trilogy, did, and that is blaming fans for not liking it because they're racists and sexist. People associated with Star Wars at all different levels, as well as a lot of it was from the media. Maybe certainly more from the media, because they've got more voices, insinuated it. But you'd see it, you'd see quotes in stories, and you'd see things on social media from people associated with Star Wars doing this as well. I think it stemmed when people with The Force Awakens, when people questioned, with Finn, how can a Stormtrooper be black? Because George Lucas had said during the prequels, and I document this in my Stormtroopers Beyond the Armor book for Lucasfilm and Disney, that George Lucas had said, the Stormtroopers were clones. Now, he changed his mind behind the scenes, but he never really said much publicly about that. It wasn't, it would have come out if he'd ever made that TV show that took place was going to take place in the underworld on Coruscant, but that show was never made. And it wasn't until Dave Filoni made Star Wars Rebels, and then he fleshed out that Stormtroopers were volunteers or conscripts or whatever, and that the clones had been retired. But unless you were a diehard Star Wars fan, you did not know that. All you knew was George Lucas had said that Stormtroopers were clones back when he was making Attack of the Clones. And that's why Jango Fett, he bumps his head. I don't know if it's in the actual movie. I can't remember. It's in the making of. He bumps his head walking out of the Slave One ship. Reference there to something changed by Disney. He bumps his head, and that was supposed to be analogous to the stormtroopers that bumped their head in A New Hope on the door on the Death Star, showing that there's a common parentage there. But so people rightly asked, and also not knowing that the First Order was sort of a different organization than the Empire, but for the average viewer, it was an appropriate question to ask. How can a stormtrooper be black? Because they should be, a space Maori kind of, because there are no Earth ethnicities in space. But so why aren't they Maori? But fans were accused of being racist for asking that question, even though it was legitimate, because George Lucas had led them to think otherwise. And then with the next movie, The Last Jedi, fans were accused, because so many of us didn't care for the movie. Fans were accused of being, racist or sexist if they didn't like the movie. And that's happened. That's what's happened with this Amazon production. Fans have been accused of, oh, if you don't like the show, it's because, you don't like that it's racially diverse. You don't like that a woman's in the main character. When it's not true. It's because the show is boring and poorly written, and makes a mess of Tolkien's writings and his themes. For example, they present the elves as pursuing Morgoth and Sauron because was something honorable, when in fact in Tolkien's writing it's because there was a little bit of arrogance there and hubris. So they get things wrong. They get a lot wrong. That's not to say I haven't enjoyed it. It's if you look at it as a Tolkien adjacent show, it's perfectly fine. It's entered well. Again, it is boring, but it's not terrible. But it's definitely not as good as it should be. But I would like to, tackle the issue of race a little bit more, because the folks at Amazon have said, if you question, the choice of changing the race of peoples, that makes you racist. Well, the truth of the matter is, the peoples of Middle Earth were, ethnically, racially diverse. There were Harfoots, cousins of hobbits, and they did have browner skin. They didn't exist during the age that this TV show takes place. The elves and the dwarves, I know the elves were all fair-skinned, and I think largely fair-haired, though I think they had differences in hair color. As far as I know, the dwarves were all fair-skinned. I don't know of any, brown-colored dwarves. So, Amazon made some changes. Now, I don't have a problem with the changes. As a simple principle of inclusion, I always think back to when, I was in grade school and you've got to do a play, where, all the characters in the story were white, but, you've got some classmates that are black and some classmates that are Indian and some classmates that are Asian and etc. And you want everybody to participate, so you change it to accommodate everybody because it's the right thing to do. And you want everybody included. And I look at it like that, because there's the books, which should forever remain unchanged, just as I think the original Star Wars should forever remain unchanged. So there's the books, which hopefully won't ever get edited or censored, but you never know in this day and age when it's all about revisionist histories. But the TV show's another matter. This is an interpretation. This is another This is a separate art. So I don't have a problem with mixing it up racially. And actually the dwarf queen or princess, as she's married to the prince, I forget her name. She's actually one of my favorite new characters in the show. I think she has that gravitas, the character. She's just got the feel of her character just down right. I mean, she feels like just an organic dwarf. She's just as natural as anyone there. So, not a bad thing at all. I'm fine with that, the racial diversity in the show. But it is legitimate to point it out that it is not authentic to Tolkien. And it's legitimate to ask, well, what should the philosophy of the show be? You look at Peter Jackson's movies, those races are all fair-skinned. Was Peter Jackson a racist? No. Was he wrong in the way he interpreted things to screen? No. So I think it's legitimate for fans to ask about that. And when Amazon calls fans racists who have brought that up, you notice they're not calling Tolkien racist. And Tolkien was the guy who wrote the books and wrote the races that way. So I find that interesting. And likewise, if Amazon is going to call anyone racist for pointing that out and inquiring, well, why didn't Amazon make Elrond black? Why didn't Amazon make Durin or Galadriel black? Why were the races of those characters so important to maintain as white? Wasn't it racist of Amazon not to consider changing it up a little and bringing some more diversity to the characters here? Why are there no Indians, or Asians in the major characters? Isn't Amazon racist for avoiding that? Did they avoid changing these main characters because they wanted to honor Tolkien's vision for them? So is it racist, or are you honoring Tolkien's vision? Why didn't Amazon put any LGBT characters in this show? Is it because they're, are they homophobic, or are they just following Tolkien's vision from the books? So I would ask, all that. And I would just say, all it's done to do the name calling that Amazon has done, it's just made things worse. As it did with Star Wars, when there was all the name calling and people who were, critical of The Last Jedi, or other things. It's just not helpful. And I'm not saying that there hasn't been racism. There's always going to be, some racist elements. The internet, I've been on the internet since the mid-90s. It has always been a cesspool of evil and the very worst things that people can offer have always been on the internet. There's always been racism. There's always been terrible things. And the sad reality of being, famous, is that you have to deal with nasty messages. As a Star Wars author, as a Marvel author, I have to deal with nasty internet messages from quote unquote fans who say and do horrible things on the internet. That's just part of the game, unfortunately, and it's not, if you're an actor or an if you're an actor or actress and you get, racist DMs, I'm sorry, I feel bad for you. It's not your fault and you shouldn't. But that's just part of being in that business. Unfortunately, that's part of engaging on the internet. But it doesn't make those things as significant as they're made to seem. The media will look for any example. They will look for one example of something and hold it up as emblematic of a systemic problem. Anything that's terrible, you can find on the internet if you spend, long enough looking, thanks to searches that you can find it pretty quick. That doesn't make it significant. That doesn't make it emblematic or systemic. If you want to, Twitter is not representative of the real world. If you want to see what the real world is like, get off the internet and go out into the real world and talk to people, and you'll find it's very different. Go to a Star Wars celebration event and ask the people on the floor what they think. Don't hold Twitter as representative. You want to know what people think about, representation in Lord of the Rings and the Rings of Power or any other movie or show. Go to San Diego Comic-Con or New York Comic-Con and ask people on the floor. Don't look for the worst, obscure, trashy corners of Twitter and the internet and tell us that that's representative. So I think this is all a big mistake, and it's showing, Amazon's being shown up for that, to turn this into a racial fight when what's really going on is it was just a poorly written, poorly executed first season, and I hope they do better the second season because it's a lot of money and expectations. So again, I'm fine with the diversity of the cast. It's great. I'm glad everybody's included. Glad the actors are there. Star Wars Andor and Rings of Power alike. But so anyway, those are my thoughts on this week. This is, what is it? It's early October 2020, and I'm signing off.